Atul, great to see you again. Congratulations on the book Being Mortal.
Thank you. You're awesome, Marty.
The book cover, I love it. It's got a piece of grass on the cover, and it's got so much potential symbolism. I immediately thought of Walt Whitman in his book Leaves of Grass. He has this famous quote from the poem, "I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass that I love." What does the leaf of grass mean to you, and why did you decide to put it on the cover?
It's a biblical reference, actually. All flesh is grass. And it refers to the idea that, on the one hand, we all come from something fertile, but also the idea that, grass is mortal, grass is temporary.
In the process of writing this book, Being Mortal, which I think is terrific, by the way, it's one of the few times we can have an honest conversation in the public forum about our mortality and about end-of-life issues. Did it hit you? Did it strike you, hey, I'm not going to be around here forever. Maybe I should talk to my patients differently about their goals. What impact did writing this book and doing the research for this book have on your own practice?
Yeah, a lot. It was kind of the story of the impact it was having to just start investigating why, even in my own practice, we don't do a very successful job of dealing with mortality. We reached by the end of the 1990s a place where 17% of the population died in the home and 83% died in institutions, often hooked up on machines, unaware of what was happening in the world, no chance to say goodbye, no chance to preserve some quality of life as they came to the end. And it was clear that this was not what people wanted and that I wasn't being successful at it. So I began interviewing patients, family members, over 200 patients, about their experiences with aging and the end of life, or just dealing with serious illness. I interviewed scores of geriatricians, palliative care physicians, hospice workers, nursing home workers, and I learned along the way. I learned about what some of them do that is really a successful process of changing care at the end, and I began trying that. And then my father was diagnosed with a brain tumor in his brainstem and spinal cord, and unexpectedly needed to use some of what I was learning as a son instead of as a doctor.
Was that a tough time for you personally?
Well, yeah, it was. Having the chance to understand what people who are more effective, whether it was as family members or as clinicians, what they do, made it less tough. Though it was very interesting. I think the core thing that came out as a lesson for me was that people have priorities besides just living longer. Yet medicine doesn't recognize that, and I was never taught to articulate and recognize that. The second part was that the most reliable method of learning what people's priorities are is to ask. And I wasn't asking. And also I wasn't asking even my own dad. And so when his condition began to deteriorate, and this is a tumor that was going to make him quadriplegic as it gradually took his life, and he faced options of surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, I started asking the questions that, people talk about asking, so what are your priorities? And what are the trade-offs you're willing to make and not willing to make? Really, really hard questions to ask, and yet changed every step of his care along the way.
You describe your grandfather, Sitaram, is that how you use it?
Sitaram,
Sitaram.
yeah.
Sitaram Gawande. He lived to be 110 years old?
110.
And he lived really in a village in India. Tell me a little bit about what you learned from his life.
So he is fascinating because he is the kind of old age that we think we want, right? He, last 20 years of his life, he needed 24-hour care basically, and yet he did not have to check into a nursing home like you would be today here. He was surrounded by family. He could sit at the head of his dinner table at home as still the head of the family. People came to him for business advice, for advice about who they should marry. He was respected and venerated. And he really was able to live as good a life as possible all the way to the very end. Now, what made that possible? And why did we lose that? That was the lesson to me that came out of it.
As a society, you mean?
As a society, yeah. Why? In other words, that was what America had in the 19th century. It's what Europe had in the 19th century. It's what China, Korea, and India are leaving right now. And why? The breakup of the extended family taking care of somebody like him is occurring because that worked only by enslaving the young. Young women to provide the care. And then on top of it, you know, his sons. Imagine reaching your 80s, still waiting to inherit your land. You know, having your economic future still dependent on your dad. And the economic progress of the world occurs because you give young people freedom. They can work where they want, live where they want, marry whom they want. They move to the cities often. They take different lines of work. They often leave the elders behind. And we didn't have a plan in the 19th century for what happens to people left behind. India, China, Korea don't either. And what we have decided, medicine will take care of it.
Just turn it over to the healthcare field and they'll fix and take care of and treat.
Yeah, my grandfather's, you know, my dad's having trouble with memory, or he's having falls in the home. Well, let's take him to the doctor and the doctor will fix that. And what happens? You take to the doctor and we say, well, you know, we like fixing problems. We've got a procedure we can do. We've got, you know, a therapy we can offer. But some problems you can't fix. And some of these, we can't make them go away. And then we throw up our hands. And we say, you know, well, I can either try X, Y, or Z or go see another specialist. And that's the failure of our understanding. There are things to fight for besides just living longer or trying to repair unrepairable problems.
When we go through school, it seems like medical schools, nursing schools attract good people. I mean, these are the type of high school student that wants to be a nurse is a remarkable person. The sort of person that interviews for medical school is a remarkable person. And then they come out in this dilemma, and is it confusion, ill-preparedness, a sense of this is out of my league? Where do things go wrong when you've got such great people going into a profession and then they're faced with dealing with a problem that they may feel is out of their league?
Well, I think there's a few things that happen. Number one is, you know, I had a geriatrics office, a clinic, right below my clinic. And for years, I walked past it without ever knowing what they did in there. I didn't have, 97% of medical schools don't teach geriatric skills. I went down, I said, let me hang out with you for a day. And the geriatrician showed me what he did. And among the things he did was recognize that the most life-threatening thing for some of his patients over 80 was that they might fall. And if they fell and broke their hip, that they had, on average, only 6 months that they survived and they were miserable. So, you know, more important than getting their mammogram, more important than the colonoscopy was preventing them from falling. And he knew how to do that. He knew how to examine the feet to look for ways that the toenails and the calluses could make someone unsteady and arrange for a podiatrist to help address those problems.
He would even see if they could reach their feet, right?
Yes, he would make them take off their socks and observe, like sit back and let them struggle to take off their shoes because it told them something about their abilities and whether there was care that they could have at home. He went further and recognized that, you know, people who are on more than 4 of the drugs have a much higher risk of falling, and he reduced the drugs so that she wasn't having trouble with dizziness and dehydration.
And he could do that because the drugs were just not really necessary?
They weren't addressing the priorities. So the priority wasn't survival. The priority was having as good a life as possible for as long as possible. And when you understood it that way, then you were making different choices and trade-offs. It didn't matter that she was just a pulsing body. It was that she was alive to do the things she wanted to do. And what she said was her biggest priority was keeping her home. And so now if I ask you, do you know the 4 risk factors for someone for their likelihood of falling and the 3 most important things that we can do? We weren't taught that. We don't know that.
Not part of our training.
Yeah. And so we didn't teach people along the way in residency, in medical school before that, what is the science of the aging body and of dying? What are the skills required to help people achieve the best possible outcomes? It actually